The year is 1590. The Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states, is drawing to a bloody, violent close. Imagine, for a moment, that you are a soldier in the army of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. You are part of the greatest military force Japan has ever seen. You look to your left, and you see lines of infantry stretching to the horizon. You look to your right, and you see forests of banners, thousands of spears glinting in the sun, and the gold-lacquered armor of legendary generals, 200,000 men, a force of nature, a dragon made of iron and flesh. Your target is Odawara Castle, the stronghold of the Hojo clan. It is known as the Impregnable Fortress, a massive complex of walls, moats, and towers that has never fallen. But you aren't worried. No walls can stand against 200,000 samurai. This is the pinnacle of the samurai way of war. Overwhelming force, clear supply lines, rigid hierarchy, and honorable combat. It is the ultimate expression of steel. Hideyoshi, the great unifier, does not rush. He builds a city of his own outside the walls. He brings tea masters, concubines, and performers. He turns the siege into a festival, a display of limitless power meant to crush the Hojo spirit simply by existing. The message is clear. We are inevitable. We are the order of the new world. But as the weeks drag into months, the massive army begins to realize something. They are not fighting a conventional enemy. The Hojo have something inside those walls that Hideyoshi's gold cannot buy, and his spears cannot touch. They have the Fuma. This is not a story about a great battle in the sunlight. This is the story of what happens when the sun goes down, and the order of the samurai meets the chaos of the ninja. This is the story of how a small band of shadows terrified an army of giants. To understand why the ninja were necessary, we must first look at the failure of the samurai. Siege warfare in feudal Japan was a brutal, mathematical affair. It was an engineering problem. If the walls were high, you built towers. If the moat was wide, you filled it in. It was slow, loud, and incredibly expensive. At Odawara, the samurai code of Bushido was hitting a wall, quite literally. Hideyoshi's generals, men of honor and breeding, were frustrated. They wanted to charge, to fight man to man, to claim heads and glory. But the Hojo wouldn't come out. They sat behind their stone ramparts, waiting. This stalemate is where the psychological crack began to form. An idle army is a nervous army. Boredom breeds complacency, but it also breeds imagination. When 200,000 men stare at a dark castle night after night, they start to see things. The Hojo clan had patronized the Fuma ninja for generations. Unlike the Iga or Koga clans, who were mercenaries for hire, the Fuma were loyal to the Hojo. They were rumored to be demons, giants, men with inverted skin. Their leader, Fūma Kotaro, was described in legends as being over 7 feet tall, with eyes that glowed like a cat's and a voice that could travel miles. Obviously, these were exaggerations, myths created to instill fear. But the samurai outside the walls didn't know that. They were superstitious men living in an era where spirits were considered as real as swords. Hideyoshi's army was preparing for a war of steel. The Fuma were preparing for a war of the mind. The sun sets over the Kanto plain. The massive encampment of the besiegers quiets down. Watchfires are lit. Patrols are set. The samurai feel safe in their numbers. What can a few hundred men do against 200,000? This is the mistake the samurai always made. They counted soldiers. Ninjas counted vectors of attack. The Fuma tactics utilized during the siege were a masterclass in ninpo. the art of endurance and stealth. They didn't try to break the army. They tried to break the army's sleep. It began with the Night of the 200. One night, under the cover of a storm, Fūma Kotaro selected 200 of his best men. They did not wear the black stagehand outfits of theater. They dressed in the rags of peasants, or even the stolen armor of Hideyoshi's own fallen scouts. They blended in with the mud and the rain. They utilized a tactic known as Gekiryu, sowing confusion. They infiltrated the camp not at a single point, but like water seeping through a cracked dam. They slipped past dozing sentries, moving with that terrifying silence that defines the ninja myth. But their goal wasn't assassination. Killing a general would only promote a lieutenant. They wanted something more contagious than death. Panic. At a signaled moment, the silence shattered. In the rear of the camp, where the horses were tethered, fires erupted. As soldiers rushed to put them out, screams echoed from the opposite side of the camp. "Betrayal! Betrayal! The enemy is inside. They are everywhere!" The Fuma agents ran through the camp shouting conflicting orders. They mimicked the voices of commanders. They pointed swords at nothing and screamed that ghosts were attacking. In the pitch black, amidst the smoke and the rain, the samurai could not tell friend from foe. Panic is a biological reaction. It bypasses the logical brain, the brain that follows the code of Bushido, and triggers the lizard brain. The samurai, trained to react to threats instantly, drew their blades. A shadow moves in the corner of your eye. You strike. Your blade connects with flesh. A man falls. Lightning flashes, and you realize you have just cut down a soldier from a friendly province. But it's too late. His comrades see you, and they attack. The Fuma didn't have to fight the army. They simply provided the spark, and the samurai army began to eat itself. By morning, the Fuma were gone. They had vanished back into the castle or melted into the surrounding countryside. The physical damage was negligible in the grand scheme. A few hundred dead, some supplies burned. To an army of 200,000, this was a scratch. But the psychological damage was catastrophic. The following night, the samurai were on edge. No one slept. Every rustle of grass, every snap of a twig, caused hands to tighten on sword hilts. The sentries were doubled, then tripled. This is the genius of the Fuma strategy. By proving they could get in, they made the samurai believe they were always in. This is where we see the true divide between the two philosophies. The samurai believes in the strength of the wall. If the wall is breached, the security is gone. The ninja believes that security is an illusion. In the nights that followed, the Fuma escalated their psychological terror. They employed hit-and-run tactics on a microscopic scale. A single ninja would infiltrate the perimeter, kill a single guard, and leave the body in a gruesome pose for the morning patrol to find. They used sound. Legends say the Fuma mastered the art of projecting their voices, or using hollow reeds to create eerie whistling sounds that mimicked demons. Imagine sitting in the dark, waiting for a battle that never comes, while the wind sounds like it is whispering your name. Rumors began to spread through the camps. They say Fūma Kotaro can turn into a dog. They say they can walk through solid wood. They say they poison the air itself. This is the weaponization of folklore. The Fuma knew that a samurai who is afraid of ghosts is a samurai who hesitates. And in war, hesitation is death. The Fuma also utilized a tactic involving captured horses. They would release wild horses with burning rags tied to their tails into the enemy camp. The chaotic stampede, the fire, the shadows stretching and twisting in the flickering light. It looked like hell had opened up. The rigid discipline of the samurai, Usually their greatest strength became a weakness. They were static targets. They were bound by orders to hold their positions. The ninja, fluid and autonomous, danced around them. It was like a boxer trying to fight a swarm of bees. Hideyoshi's naval forces were blockading the coast, preventing supplies from reaching the castle by sea. The Hojo were starving. The Fuma saw an opportunity not just to gather supplies, but to humiliate the enemy. On a moonless night, a group of Fuma divers, experts in aquatic stealth, slipped into the dark waters. These men trained to hold their breath for impossible lengths of time, using bamboo shoots as snorkels. They swam silently toward the massive Atakabun, the floating fortresses of Hideyoshi's navy. These ships were heavily guarded, towering wooden castles on the water. The ninja didn't try to board the ships. That would be suicide. Instead, they attacked the ship's ability to function. They swam underneath and used saws to weaken the rudders. They drilled holes in the hulls, plugging them with temporary stoppers that could be pulled remotely or would dissolve over time. But the true masterstroke was the severed head trick. The ninja surfaced near the ships, making just enough noise to be heard. When the guards looked over the railing, they saw heads bobbing in the water. Thinking they were drowning peasants or debris, the guards lowered lanterns. Suddenly, the heads came alive. The ninja threw hooked ropes, snagging the guards and pulling them into the black water. Before the alarm could be raised, the ninja were gone. The next morning, several of Hideyoshi's prized ships were listing, taking on water. Others were drifting aimlessly with broken rudders. The mightiest navy in Japan had been sabotaged by men wearing nothing but loincloths and carrying knives. It was a victory of ingenuity over industrial power. It proved that no amount of armor can protect you if you don't understand the nature of the water you are floating in. Ultimately, history tells us that Odawara fell. The Hojo surrendered not because the Fuma failed, but because the sheer logistical weight of Hideyoshi's army was too much. You cannot assassinate a lack of food. You cannot sneak attack a blockade that lasts for months. The steel eventually crushed the resistance through pure grinding weight. But the legacy of the Siege of Odawara is not the samurai victory. It is the ninja performance. The Fuma clan, with a tiny fraction of the manpower, managed to destabilize, terrify, and embarrass the greatest military force of the era. They bought the Hojo months of time. They forced the samurai to change how they set up camps, how they assigned passwords, and how they thought about the dark. The samurai represents the structure. They are the fortress, the standing army, the open battle. They are powerful, but they are slow to adapt. When faced with a problem that doesn't fit their code, like an enemy who refuses to fight honorably, they stumble. The ninja represents the solvent. They are the water that cracks the stone. They identify the weak point, whether it's a rudder on a ship, a sleeping sentry, or the superstitious fear in a soldier's heart, and they apply pressure until it breaks. At Odawara, we saw that structure can win the war, but solvent wins the moments that matter. The Fuma proved that a soldier's armor is useless if his mind is undefended. They showed us that in the equation of war, fear is a multiplier. One ninja in the shadows is worth 100 samurai in the light, simply because the samurai doesn't know where the ninja is. As the Hojo clan fell and the era of peace began, the role of the ninja changed. They became spies, police, and garden guards. The chaos of the Sengoku period was replaced by the rigid order of the Edo period. But the lesson of the Fuma remains relevant. It is a lesson in asymmetry. When you are outgunned, outmanned, and surrounded, you do not play by the enemy's rules. You do not meet force with force. You meet force with confusion. You attack the mind. You become the shadow that the steel cannot cut. The Siege of Odawara was the samurai's greatest display of power, but it was also the ninja's greatest stage. It was the moment when the two ideologies clashed most violently, and we learned that while the samurai may rule the day, the ninja owns the night. So, the next time you look at a fortress, don't look at the high walls and the strong gates. Look at the shadows in the corners. Look at the dark water in the moat. Because that is where the real battle is fought. So, that is the reality of Odawara. Strength doesn't always mean victory. Let me know in the comments. Would you feel safer behind the walls or out in the shadows? If you want more stories forged from history, hit that subscribe button. This is ShadowForgedSteel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.